Welcome to the TekWars official podcast. This is the official and only place for TekWars news and information about the TekWars franchise. I'm here with a special guest today, Patrick Casey. He is the president of AIM America, the American Identity Movement. He is a controversial man in the world. People talk about him, they say different things. I generally don't believe everything that I hear, and I want to talk to the man and get to know the man, because that's why we're here. And I want to start out by just thanking him for coming on at short notice.
Thank you, Patrick.
You got it. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm glad to be here.
Because I want to do a podcast with you for a while. We talked about doing it before, and it never really materialized. So I thought this would be a good opportunity for us to catch up. We talk a lot on Twitter about different things. We go back and forth. We have our little rivalry. I don't know if you'd call it that. It's a rivalry of love.
I don't know if I'd call it a rivalry. At least it's not one I'm aware of. But yeah, we go way back to the 2016 election. I remember, I think one of your accounts, I don't know if it was your main one, was temporarily suspended or something. And you were going on about that, and I made a joke about, Kantbot was never good, which was obviously in retrospect in poor taste, given the suspension that had just happened. But I was kidding, for the record. And you responded by calling me a normie Spencerite, and that one really stung. But we quickly, became friends after that, and I am a big supporter of Kantbot content. So no rivalry on my end, at least.
And I'm a big supporter of yours as well.
Thank you.
You're a good-humored guy. I think at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. No matter how much flack people try to give you, as long as you're a good-natured person, I don't have any problem with you or anyone who's good-natured.
Thank you. Yeah, there are definitely many questionable figures that are drawn to dissident politics, and the media is absolutely interested in finding people with these views and using them to create a narrative. Right, during the 2016 election, they were trying to prove that Trump was racist. Trump's most ardent supporters in the alt-right and within mainstream Trumpism were working overtime to try to counteract that narrative. Well, many in the alt-right were more than happy to be basically to say, yes, I'm racist, not in those words perhaps, and I support Donald Trump. So the issue there is that there's a tendency for questionable people to kind of be nominated as the leader or one of, a prominent figure in dissident politics, to be anointed as such by the media. So what you said about making sure that people are good-humored and well-intentioned is absolutely very important.
That's something that always drives me crazy, is that the characterizations of people are very tenuous. That's how it always happens in the media that I've saw over the years, before Trump and before the election, and before everything got really controversial. That was something that I had noticed for a long time, was people getting characterized in a certain way. And then when you look into what they really say, it's not exactly like that. It's more complicated, or I could say that person had a reasonable argument to make about things. And they sort of try to take that away from you. Right.
It's very dehumanizing. There is a systematic process by which people who, dare voice the wrong opinion on any of these controversial subjects are unpersoned, right? To even question whether or not ethnic diversity is a societal strength is to basically become unpersoned, right? To say, hey, there's a lot of research that's been done, maybe it's not correct, but maybe we should be talking about these things. There are a number of sacred cows within the progressive worldview, and if you dare question them, then you will face a systematic response from the establishment in the form of the mainstream media. That's the biggest one. Big tech companies will censor you and deplatform you. And then obviously one of the more, I would argue, one of the most insidious ways that the establishment keeps people quiet is the financial aspect, right? People get kicked off of Patreon, PayPal. You've had MasterCard come in a few times and demand that a certain content creator gets kicked off of Patreon. And, you've also heard of people having their bank accounts removed. And I don't know of anyone at this point who cannot find a bank account anywhere, but I wouldn't be surprised if things continue along this current trajectory, if there are people in the future, maybe me, for whom having a bank account will be seen as a luxury of the past.
It's just going to pump Bitcoin. That's what it's going to do.
Don't promote Bitcoin.
Well, it's good to know that there is somewhat of an alternative out there.
But this is something that I was thinking about just the other day, about like if you take what someone like Richard Spencer says and you actually listen to what he's actually saying, he has these very benign, almost liberal views about many things, right. Like about what he thinks about transgenderism. Not really, calling for concentration camps for transgendered people. Like, it almost creates a trap for people to try to be reasonable on the assumption that if they're reasonable, they can get a fair discussion about what they're saying. So you have people like Richard Spencer who are trying to placate people as much as possible, be as reasonable as possible, articulate their points as best as possible, and it backfires on them in a way, because no matter what, their views are going to be described as radical, and people are not going to be able to really have access to what it is he's even saying.
Right. Well, working within mainstream media it's a gamble, right? Because I think most people who do so are aware of the fact that the media is going to try to craft a narrative that serves their interests and serves elite interests. But at the same time, it's the potential for self-promotion shouldn't be overlooked. So I think that if you're involved in dissident politics and you're considering working with the media, you just have to be very discerning and very selective, and very discriminatory, right? For example, I will not work with HuffPost or Vice. For a good 6 months, I had tons of Vice reporters reaching out, trying to get me to work on something, wanting to come by where I live to film something. I ran into, Elle Reeve and her sidekick at CPAC, and she was batting her eyes at me and doing her whole routine, and I mean, it didn't work. So you just have to be very careful. Now, I did an interview with NBC at AMRA in 2018, and it was I felt like the questions were pretty fair. So they got in touch with me a month or two later and told me they wanted to send a crew to my house to film B-roll footage. So for anyone who doesn't know what that means, they just wanted footage of me walking down the street, I don't know, playing guitar, doing the dishes, normal human things. But what ended up happening was they sat down in the living room and basically grilled me for an hour. And later I found out that I was going to be on the Today Show. And the interesting thing is that they basically hung on to that footage for close to 6 months and didn't do anything with it. They waited to drop it right before midterms. And the whole thing was about how, I'm secretly trying to take over the GOP. It was basically the result of, one question that they asked me. That was their whole narrative. But yeah, absolutely. It really is a gamble working with the mainstream media. So I would encourage people who are, involved in these spheres and considering doing so just to be very discriminatory with regards to who you work with.
Because there is this issue, it seems like an old-fashioned thing of like the ethics of hermeneutics. As a lot of times, all these problems and conflicts and little fissures we have in our society, they seem to be stemming from debates about who has priority over interpretive situations, like who gets to make the narrative, who gets to decide who the racist is. Was that comment something that someone should have their life destroyed for, or was it something that we can just sort of laugh at and move on from? And it's a fight of like force of the media especially trying to really take control and say that no one else has the interpretive right of way. But is that really how interpretation works in terms of hermeneutics and what the ethical standard that we have to hold ourselves to? I mean, we all have that access to in our ability to interpret it. So we all have that power, and we all have that equally. It's all sort of our right to be able to do that.
Right. Well, they can't. At this point, they can't literally force us to believe something. What they do is they create incentives for believing certain ideas and so forth, and they disincentivize not just believing, but mostly expressing other positions, right? The ones that people on the dissident right would argue to be true. So what I would say is that it's absolutely a result of power relations. People with power, the people who occupy the power centers in society today, are the ones who, at the end of the day, it's their interpretation is the one that wins, regardless of what anyone else thinks is ethical. You can say the whole thing is a sham, and maybe it is, and so forth. But when you have the power, you get to decide the narrative. Now, obviously, the faith in the mainstream media has declined quite a bit in the past, 5 years or so. But at the same time, it's still going pretty strong, right? If the media wants you fired from your job, you're probably going to get fired from your job. So, we could talk all we want about discrediting the media, about waking up the average person and convincing them of the duplicity of the media's agenda, but until there's a shift in power at the top, I don't think that we can expect much to change in that regard.
The perfect example of what they do is with all the claims about, Trump has told 2,000 lies, or however many lies it is, and how that story gets reported constantly, like every few weeks, and they're like, there's the new milestone of how many times he's lied. But there's so many times when you go and you look at the individual lies that he supposedly told, and it's really a very sort of amorphous situation. Like he said that he fed the football players hot McDonald's, and people said, well, you have to account for the time that it took them to get it from McDonald's to there, so it was probably not hot.
It was cold.
And so that's one of his big, 5,000 lies or
big
whatever.
Fat liar.
Yeah, they're basically trying to gaslight people into believing that their analysis of Trump is totally objective, and they're trying to occlude the fact that there is quite a bit of subjective analysis being done there. And I mean, just without getting into the specifics of how some of the things that they fact check or whatever are just absurd. There's also a lot to be said for the choice of what to fact check, right? I think every politician gets on stage and tells lies, exaggerates things, either intentionally or unintentionally. But when it comes to Snopes and the Washington Post, New York Times, so not only are they being incredibly anal with Trump and getting down into the minutia and very frivolous critiques, but they're also choosing what gets maybe they'll leave lies out for other politicians. So there is, we absolutely should point out that these attempts to objectively analyze, politicians and so forth, there is an agenda there as well, and it's not as rooted in facts and logic as they would have us believe.
That's one of the biggest lies, and that all goes back to, I think the Stephen Colbert, like his first episode. Do you know what I'm talking about of the Colbert Show? And his truthiness thing, do you remember that?
No, I don't.
Well, that was like the thing that kind of like launched his solo career, is that he had his first episode of his show and he had his word, it's truthiness, and then he did his like making fun of Republicans thing, and it was all about how Republicans, they think from their gut and they don't care about science and objectivity and facts and logic and things like that. And that's like the dominant perception, but especially when it comes to social issues and, interpreting what the culture means and trying to find out what, someone's statement means and whether or not they have their good intentions or not. That's not like a matter of science, but there's this huge delusion that the news narrative is an objective reflection of reality and not a subjective arrangement of facts.
What do you think the end game with that is? You mentioned agenda. I was thinking about that word, and it seems like these outlets are kind of digging their own grave a bit, exposing themselves as frauds as the days go on. So what do you think the agenda or end game for these people are?
I think we lost. I think we lost already. And that they've now partnered with the social media companies really well.
Yeah,
and
like
now
Snapchat. And
yeah.
It's fucked.
Yeah, I've heard some people argue that legacy media is dying. As the boomers die off, fewer and fewer people are going to be watching CNN and so forth, and there's probably quite a bit of truth to that. But we should keep in mind that all of these outlets, CNN, Washington Post, New York Times, it's not as if they're only print or on TV, right? They're on the internet too, and yeah, at the same time, there's something like behind or above these media, these large media corporations, and it's a force. It's perhaps groups of people. It's not like it's one group of people meeting together, but they'll find other ways. Either they or just the forces that are promoting this will find other ways.
Yeah, someone who's listening to this right now is that they would say that you are talking about Jews, and that means that you're evil.
Well, okay,
but I'm not saying that you're saying that, but I'm just pointing out.
Thank you for not accusing me of being evil, Kantbot. Well, what I'll say about obviously, if you look at the globalists and you look at people who qualify as elites in today's society, many of them are Jews. Many of them, within the Jewish community, even within Jewish elites, there is kind of a split between the more Zionist types and the more, liberal internationalist Soros types. So there isn't, some Jewish hive mind. But there are also many non-white people who are active, many white people and other non-Jews who are active in elite circles as well. So to just say that it's the Jews, it would be inaccurate. And it's. I wasn't specifically talking.
I know.
The Jews. Yeah, but
it's just that that's what they do with these conspiracy theories. I'm a wholehearted supporter of all conspiracy theories. I love conspiracy theories, and I think there's a lot of truth to like most of them.
All of them.
Pretty much all of them. I think all conspiracy theories are basically true. But
what about Bigfoot?
I think that is probably true. I've seen some very interesting things. I don't know. We can talk about the Dyatlov Pass incident later.
Okay.
I think that there's some connection there between the Yeti or the Bigfoot, but I just think when it comes to these conspiracy theories, that's the unspoken thing. That's the reverse dog whistle going on in this situation. Is that if someone took what you said, they could then put it on their news site and say that he was really talking about the Jews.
Just a soundbite.
But when we talk about how a conspiracy theory works, it's much more complicated than that, because obviously we're talking about a prevailing, ideology that's replicating itself. That's not a right-wing theory. I mean, that's something that comes from Marx. That's just the basic theory of ideology that I think that pretty much the right and the left generally accept in some form.
Yeah, I think that most conspiracy theories that, postulate that there is one group of people that is responsible for much of the evils of the world, I think that analysis, there's obviously going to be some truth there, like you said, but it really leaves out so many other interesting elements, like what you were discussing with ideology, how that operates on its own. And the technological factor as well. I think some of the largest shifts in human history, paradigm shifts, have been driven by technology. So that's largely impersonal. Obviously someone, designed the printing press and so forth, but that's, you could argue that was something that was part of, as a result of, natural law was going to happen eventually. But Yeah, I mean, the conspiracy angle is certainly one to consider, but yeah, it's far more complex than, people who blame everything on bankers or Jews or, the Freemasons or whatever would have you believe.
Because there is, these ideas, they take on a life of their own. And I do feel like that's something that gets lost with when we talk about globalism, is because the media has corrupted that term and to try to deflect away from the fact that we're not talking about a group of people, we're talking about an ideology that many people in power do have, or that's, what they believe. And I think that's a completely valid thing to talk about, that, even left-wing criticism and theory has addressed and is, aware of. But when people on the right try to talk about globalism, they don't get the, taking it to power kind of, praise that leftists would get when they're criticizing the UN or, the International Monetary Fund and organizations like that, which, promote the globalist ideology across the world.
They fight it with the idea of like workers unite, and they put it under a guise of something that seems much more benevolent than not that there's malevolence to it, but there's when you're talking about globalism, there is. But I think that it's much easier for journalists to take sound bites, take anything that anyone on the right says, and misconstrue it entirely. I think that's not just unintentional, but completely what they're going for.
Yeah, I would agree. To say that being a leftist has no social cost isn't entirely true. I think there's certainly a lot of truth there, and you hear people on the right say it quite often. But there have been examples of leftists getting censored on social media. And I'm not talking about, some leftist. Obviously, if you call for violence on Twitter, you're going to get kicked off. But that's not something that's really ideological. That's just you being lunatic. Right, yeah. Doxing kids and whatever else. So I think most of the people who did that to the Covington Catholic kids are still on Twitter. Even the guy who talked about throwing them into a wood chipper. Very normal and healthy things to be saying. But there was an example, and I don't have it on hand, unfortunately, but there were a number of leftists who were tweeting stuff, they're posting on Facebook criticizing the military-industrial complex. They were pointing out the collaboration between Facebook and the media and the military, and it's actually pretty egregious if you read some of these articles on it. And I believe they did get the axe. So there are things that the left touches on that do threaten the globalist power structure, for lack of a better term. But ultimately, at this point, I don't think that. I think leftist concerns are more easily assimilated into the neoliberal order, for lack of a better term. Obviously there are many right wing views that are assimilable as well. We saw discontent on the right with. That's why I like the term globalism, because it's something that isn't, perhaps there's some issues with the term, but it's something that really isn't right or left, right? We see a lot of issues with the establishment right and with the establishment left. And unfortunately, I would say most people on either side of the divide, there are issues on which they are blinded by ideology that, they're unaware of the ways that it's working through them. And it only, ends up serving the interests of elites. So
that's what's so, weirdly pervasive in all these discussions that people have about, globalism, is that they generally assume that it is supposed to be kind of like a left-wing communist conspiracy theory. But I think, the whole process of globalization began before there was any left or right division. We're talking about something that's been going on since the 17th century. That was the big concern of someone like David Hume, was that there was going to be what he called universal monarchy, that you have all these different dynastic families controlling different European states. And there was points in history where all of a sudden it could happen that the King of France and the King of Spain were, the same person because the lines were crossing. And whole states got absorbed into one another like overnight because of that. And so what someone like David Hume was really worried about before there was any left or right or communism or fascism was that at some point all of Europe would fall under the control of a dynastic family sort of by accident, and that would probably be, the Bourbons. And I feel like the EU and these globalist organizations, it's the exact same thing. That's why I think that Brexit is actually kind of funny, because that's what the Glorious Revolution was kind of about, is that's the British Constitution, that they're going to oppose the universal monarchy under France on the continent. And it's now sort of like the same thing is happening over again.
Interesting. Yeah, that's definitely a one way to look at it. So yeah, I've never had someone argue that globalism has been going on since the early 1700s, but I think, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if people back then, for example, David Hume, as you pointed out, started to notice the beginnings of some of these, trends toward more, of a centralization of power. And I wonder how much of that has to do with technology, how much of that has to do with the emergence of a new mercantile elite. Do you think those two factors are main ones there, or is there something I'm missing?
It was definitely economic competition between nations was a big thing that was going on, that started coming about in the 17th century. And I think that's also when really monetary theory began. And so that's when we start getting the ideas about, debt financing, using the public debt, inflating money, printing more money, the relative values of different currencies. And that sort of drove, the forces of globalization. And I don't think that, even someone like Kant sort of prefigured the idea of the European Union. He wrote about it in Perpetual Peace. So people have been prefiguring this for a long time and predicting it. And then since World War II, it's sort of become our reality, especially since the end of the Cold War. And so now we have, it's the United States as the ultimate manifestation of the leader of globalism, spreading capitalism around the world. But it's also a form of capitalism which is highly managed and, from the top down by technocrats. So it's a really weird, culmination that doesn't really cross simple economic definitions between left and right and collective ownership and corporatism. It's all sort of become the same thing as the culmination of itself. But I don't know if you agree with that.
Sorry, I had my mic muted for a second there. Yeah, I absolutely do agree, and I would certainly agree with the idea that the root causes for globalism are not hatred of white people or something like that. It's definitely rooted in economics and perhaps definitely many technological factors as well. I think what you have is this economic incentive for cheap labor that in large part is promoting mass immigration, right? That leads to people lobbying for open borders, people on both sides, politicians on both sides of the aisle being incentivized to stay away from the immigration issue, right? It's been, Americans have wanted less immigration for a very long time. And other than, Donald Trump and perhaps a handful of congressmen, there aren't too many people talking about that. And we saw how the system responded when someone came along campaigning to stop illegal immigration. I don't think Trump really campaigned too much on stopping legal immigration, which I would argue is possibly a much larger issue. But the thing to keep in mind is so you have this main drive for, demographic change really rooted in wanting to bring in cheap labor. And then at the same time, the desire to knock down borders and to have a more integrated global economy and system which is particularly that process is particularly apparent in Europe, makes sense from a business perspective too, right? You don't want to have to deal with all of these, different national regulations and moving things across borders, different tax rates, right? So it would make sense from I would argue, a non-malicious perspective too. If you're just some, blue-pilled technocrat or businessman, you're like, well, yeah, this would make the world a lot better if we just knocked down all the borders and brought people together. Now, there are many elites who are not motivated by just trying to create like a more integrated world for, benign reasons. I think there are many of them who are legitimately terrible and even evil people. But with like the anti-white and anti-Western stuff comes in is if you have that economic incentive to, again, import a new, basically cheap labor from abroad, quickly you would realize that if you're one of these elites, you would realize that the natives, those provincial natives, don't want to become minorities in their homelands. So that's where I think you have the elites benefit from some of these the anti-white identity politics, right? Promoting, non-white ethnic advocates who actually do have racial animus toward white people and weaponizing them to basically promote what's in their best interests. So I think that, the root cause of all of this is economic and technological. But, if you go down the pyramid, so to speak, you do have, the what many in the alt-right would focus on, which is, anti-white leftists who say, oh, we need to get rid of the white race and whatever else. But I don't think that's the main factor.
Yeah, that's completely evident in Silicon Valley. I think because it's pervasively white, and most people that you're describing would call them like self-deprecating white people. But that's not the case. They're just economically incentivized people. I think
it's very symptomatic. It's not really the main thing that's going on. Is that, of course, different groups are going to be pitted against each other by bringing them into competition with one another. Mm-hmm. Is that's what, even someone like David Hume 200 years ago was able to foresee and predict was going to happen with countries like India and China, and it was already happening back then. So, of course, when you put these groups into economic competition with each other, there is obviously going to be conflict. And then this sort of that's something that you could easily see Marx saying. But when you say it all of a sudden is not granted the intelligence of an actual opinion. And it's simply reduced down to what he really means is there's Jews in a room who want to destroy white people.
Right. And again, to clarify, I know you don't believe that I believe that, but yeah, definitely not what I'm saying here in case anyone listening to this is... But
you're saying an intelligent thing. You're saying an opinion that deserves respect.
Thank you.
And that the low-hanging fruit that would be grabbed by the people that would make those statements is...
But I'm not allowed to have respect for your opinion. Other people are not allowed to have respect for your opinion. If you do, you're guilty by association. So why can't we have a freedom to interpret what another person is saying and give them the benefit of the doubt and try to extract an actual, substantive, debate that we can have from what you're saying?
I absolutely agree. Yeah, I support freedom of speech. I support the civil exchange of ideas and debate. And that is basically considered fascism at this point, along with the rule of law, which, anyone who understands fascism knows that is generally the rule of man, not the rule of law. But the idea that these classical liberal values are now deemed fascist is just evident. It's evidence of how insane things have really gotten.
Now we're in the liberals, we're in the Dinesh territory now. Where are the big
I
lad
don't know if
territory?
you guys have ever considered it this way, but I'm working on this theory that the liberals are fascists and the Democrats are actually the real racists. So
It's big. It's groundbreaking
yeah, I'm
territory.
going to write a book on it. It's gonna do numbers.
Simply epic.
Well, I mean, what I want to do is I want to, support. My position is that the Green New Deal is Nazi fascism, and that's a good thing. And that I'm a Nazi, and I believe in the Green New Deal as what Nazism is.
AOC is Queen Führer.
Yeah, she's a real national socialist, and I'm not about that. So I don't know if I can support her for those reasons.
I'm absolutely 100% on board. We got to get back to the blood and soil sort of Nazism. And I think that's what the Green New Deal really is when you actually think about it.
The Green New Deal is National Socialism. You should expand on
ecology is fascism.
that. Yeah, it's
The fascists were the first ecologists. The communists, the Stalinists, wanted to destroy the earth and turn it into a giant factory.
Yeah, I have to applaud Kantbot for having the best political takes. I don't know if I always agree with them, but I think one of my favorite Kantbot political takes is that Marx was an anarcho-capitalist. Marx was a libertarian.
yes.
But what is? I don't know why people find that like so.
Pissed off many communists on the internet, and it's.
But I'm right.
confusing.
That's the best.
I think
part.
that's when I'm going to have to agree with you on that one.
I take these things seriously. I don't know, this is where I think that I'm weird about things, is that when I hear everyone and they talk about Marx and they get pissed off about it and nobody reads it. And then I read it and I'm just like, well, he's just like a libertarian. It's like, why don't people read these things? It's so clear. No one reads them, so they get ossified in a very specific way.
Can you do a brief rundown on the Marx is an anarcho-capitalist argument? Because I think there might be people listening who aren't too familiar with that.
It's really very incredibly simple. Is that Marx believes that completely unregulated markets, running at 100% efficiency, it will bring about communism. That's how you get to communism. Marx never opposed capitalism per se. He just believed that capitalism was inefficient and that it would ultimately develop into communism, and that communism was completely based around, the accumulation of capital that happened under capitalism. And that even like Marx's son-in-law wrote books about how his name was Paul Lefrog, and he wrote books about how everything in communism was going to be all about consumption, and that there'd be total abundance from like how amazing like manufacturing had become, and that everything would be free because there would be so much of it. But then you get to thinking, and it's like, isn't that what we're sort of like going for now under like total capitalism? So is that really communism? It gets a bit spooky when you actually think about it.
Lefrog
Yeah, it sounds like libertarianism to me. I think the communists of today aren't they're not ready to grapple with such a profound revelation.
They would cry. They wouldn't know what to do.
I think there was. Did you draw some kind of comic Kantbot illustrating the similarities between the two?
It was a 4chan edit of a green text. I think that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, I think I saw that circling around on some Marxist subreddit, and they were not very happy with it. It was the kind of thing where they're like, "Oh, this is so ridiculous. It's so clearly untrue," but they were, kept talking about it. So.
Yeah, I believe that was a Joe Rogan edit.
Do you read the Chapo Trap House subreddit?
Oh.
I've been on there a few times. I actually have been listening to the podcast somewhat frequently recently. I mean, I think I listened to an episode like a year ago, and I've listened to maybe the past 5. I'm kind of getting to the point where it's grating on my nerves, but it's definitely interesting to take a look at that subculture from time to time.
You have to bear through it for the opposition research. We were just talking about this at dinner.
What are your favorite subreddits?
I don't, I don't really use a lot of Reddit, so I'm afraid I don't have much to say about that.
This is where I go. I feel compelled to go and, see what the stupid people think.
I mean, I used Reddit somewhat often, not every day, before I before I became really interested in politics in 2015. And I mean, after that point, every time I'd open the front page, it was just, incredibly awful. I remember I got banned from our books for disputing whether or not, this is quite a bit, possibly a bit cringe, but disputing whether or not Cersei was actually raped by Jaime. And I remember it was like, I put rape in quotation marks. It was like a one-word reply, and I had been banned from our books after that. So that was, I don't know if our literature is any better, but don't spend too much time on Reddit. But Kodpot, which subreddits do you enjoy going on?
Oh man, I really enjoy the Mueller. There's a Mueller subreddit that's really funny.
Is that done by people who buy into the Mueller investigation?
Yeah, of course. And then there's, just the default politics sub is like really, crazy resistance stuff, like 24/7, like the official like default Reddit politics sub. So it's
incredibly partisan.
Yeah, I read that all the time. I love it. I just always, you got to go to sort controversial on the comments.
Yeah. Then you see where people are really going against the approved Reddit framing. What about you, Warren? Are you a Redditor?
I used to be. I used to enjoy the $1 Million Extreme subreddit.
That's a good one.
Yeah, there was some good content on there before it got.
They did get banned.
Yeah, it got banned. It's unfortunate. I think everything Sam touches gets banned, unfortunately, but. As my friend Jordan, who's here, pointed out, I think that was a blessing in disguise, possibly. Not big on Reddit too much, but I am big on trolling Reddit, or I was at least. And back to Marx, we talked about Marx as a troll. How do you, Kanpa, what do you think about Goethe as a troll? You had made a post about Goethe and Schiller.
All writers are trolls, basically.
All writers.
Yeah, I think that's where I differ from you, Patrick, is that you are, you're trying to make your politics respectable, and I just want to troll everyone. I think that's the way to healing, and it seems contradictory and paradoxical, but I believe it's sort of like a spear of destiny kind of thing, like Parsifal, and that like the only thing that can cure the wound is like the thing that caused it.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, there's quite a bit to be said for trolling. I used to do quite a bit, but there are expectations of me representing an organization, so obviously I can't be too silly. But I say that I guess I have a scumbag Steve hat on my Twitter avatar. But yeah, no, I mean, so trolling is absolutely effective because particularly, or rather, I'd say especially, when it's good-natured. Like if you feel like someone's making fun of your belief system, but they're not doing it hatefully, they're trying to basically point out the inconsistencies or the absurdities of the things that you hold dear, then you might perhaps be a little more inclined. If someone's coming out there and they're like, I hate you and this, that, you're not going to be particularly interested. But trolling is a great way of shattering sacred cows. It's a great way of calling into question the legitimacy or the veracity of whatever orthodoxy is deemed mandatory by society.
Does that piss you off? Do you miss being able to troll now? Do you feel confined?
Not really. I mean, it's somewhat of a similar effect when I do something in public, like we did the politics and prose action. I mean, that was kind of a troll. It wasn't as, silly, I guess, but, there are other ways of getting a rise out of people. So, doing it in person is definitely unmatched, but you would know that better than anyone, being the YouTube celebrity who famously claimed that Donald Trump would complete the system of German idealism.
Richard Spencer quoted that like right after it happened, like at like whatever white nationalist think group or whatever was having a convention. What was it called? What was it?
Amren.
Was it? Do you remember the month that you did it?
It was like in November or December.
Yeah. So there was NPI 2016,
NPI.
which
It was
was
NPI.
when the alt-right died. That was when alt-right was, suffered from a fatal self-inflicted wound that took a while to finally kill what was once a movement with potential. But I think just given the timing, if he said it right afterwards, then yeah, it might have been at NPI 2016. Fun fact: I remember sitting at the dinner table with Aristotle and Prince Hubris at NPI 2016, and Prince Hubris was actually telling me about the German idealism video, and I hadn't seen it, and I was sitting there like, this sounds like the best video ever. And then I watched it later, and I realized that it is, or at least at the time, was the best video ever.
And it brings me to you. It connects us together. That's
right. It all
bond.
comes back to the Kant bot in where was that, in New York, Times Square.
No, it brings me and you together. That's why I'm grateful that it happened. Is because now it allows me and you to sit here and talk about things.
Talk about TekWars. What do you think about TekWars?
Yeah, we haven't talked about TekWars on the TekWars podcast.
It's shameful.
I don't know if you've seen it. I got to ask you, maybe, what's your favorite sort of like 90s sci-fi TV show?
Call me a Philistine, but I haven't seen TekWars.
It's okay. I haven't either, and I'm on the podcast.
Totally uncultured.
But you got your other options out there. You got Sliders. You could go for Sequest. You could go for a Stargate-related property, for Star Trek. The world's your oyster.
What is your favorite media go-to?
No, we gotta. What's your favorite 90s science fiction?
Okay,
We're gonna pry it.
Both of those questions. I don't know if I have favorite 90s science fiction. I think the only thing I've seen from the list you just provided is I've seen some Stargate. I like the Stargate movie. Obviously a classic. I tried to make it through season 1, and I really liked the setting, or just kind of the premise, but hopefully you're not going to crucify me for criticizing Stargate, but it kind of seemed like it followed a very formulaic pattern, right? There was kind of the overarching plot theme of, I think they were trying to find someone's dad or something, and every episode was like, all right, we're going to a different planet. And it's like, okay, this episode we're going to the Crystal Planet. They're like, oh, wow, there are all these crystal people on the planet. And then, we almost got killed, but now we're safe. And then maybe like 5 minutes of, man, we really need to go find your dad, huh? And then they're like, yeah. And then it goes back to like, and then the next month it's like, oh, here are the swamp people. It just seemed very Monster of the Week-esque. But maybe the series gets better. And again, the movie was pretty good. But
I'm not a Stargate fan. I would agree with you. It's not the best. I go for more Babylon 5 kind of stuff, or Star Trek are my go-tos.
I haven't seen much Star Trek. I've seen the occasional episode here and there. I think I could appreciate Star Trek. I think at least some of the series or I guess shows. I guess there are multiple shows within the Star Trek franchise are probably pretty good. I haven't taken the dive, so to speak. I had a friend who told me he was getting into Star Trek, and then he was basically watching Star Trek for like 6 months in his free time and not doing much else. So I don't, it doesn't seem like the kind of thing you can just, the kind of pool you can just casually dip your toe in. So I'm not ready. Perhaps I'm not ready to take the plunge there. But to answer your question, when it comes to 90s Star Trek, 90s sci-fi, I don't know if anything comes to mind, at least in terms of TV shows. I've seen I saw the Battlestar Galactica remake, which obviously isn't from the 90s. I thought it was good.
I would group that in there. That was like around 2000, 2001.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised with that. I think I like sci-fi, but I think that when it's brought to life, sci-fi literature is obviously great. Not that I'm too much of an expert there, but when you bring sci-fi to life on the screen, it can be very easy to make it cheesy, and cheesy movies can be good on their own terms. But I thought Battlestar was pretty good.
Okay, so let's untie your hands, and you can answer Warren's question just in a more general way and say something that you actually enjoy, rather than trying to pretend that you're a Stargate expert.
Sure.
So, what's your favorite media go-to film or TV show?
Film or TV show? I can name some of my favorite films. I like The Prestige. That's definitely Nolan's best film. I like Shutter Island.
Ooh.
I like Taxi Driver. Lord of the Rings trilogy. There are probably a few more that I'm confident in saying without that I don't think I'll get owned on Twitter for later. Brotherhood of the Wolf's pretty good. It's a French one.
Have you seen the Terminator trailer?
Is there a new Terminator coming out?
Oh,
Yeah.
Yes, there is. Compot, what do you think about that?
That was really gross trailer.
Old Boy's a pretty good one too. I forget the name of the director. He also did Snowpiercer, which I thought was good, but not as amazing as people hyped it up to be. And again, maybe I'm just a Philistine and I don't know better.
I sort of felt the same way when I watched it.
Yeah, I mean, my autism was just bothered by like the logistical questions of a civilization existing along, just this massive train. I'm thinking, how are they getting things from one end to the other? How is, you have to go from one place. I don't know. It just seemed like a bit much, but it was definitely an interesting premise for a movie, and certainly worth watching once. When it comes to TV shows, both seasons, or I guess there's a third season, I haven't seen it, but the first two seasons of True Detective are pretty good. I'm torn as to which one is better. Obviously, that for anyone who's seen it, that's kind of a pressing question. I enjoyed watching Lost when it came out. I think the first two seasons are really good. I liked the survivalism, the sense of mystery. In particular, it definitely got pretty weird towards the end. I wasn't as bothered by the ending as some people. I was a little more bothered by seasons. I think it was 4 and 5, just taking a turn for the worse, I guess. I enjoyed. I think Dexter's good, particularly the first two seasons. There's a lot to be said for Dexter representing, alienation, kind of the alienated male. Not that alienation is obviously very.
You're not on your 7th Office rewatch, I guess.
No, I'm on my 8th. And Michael Scott is totally ridiculous. He's just always saying ridiculous things. Jim and Pam are really great together.
I'm ashamed to say that
I've seen some. I watched some of The Office when I was younger. People would put it on in college. Some of it's, I guess, kind of funny. I don't know. That does make me somewhat of a normie, though. So maybe I should be careful. But
they're gonna go after you on Twitter. They're gonna own me for not having the correct opinions on media.
So what's your favorite band?
That's a hard question.
Do you go for the Depeche Mode?
I can appreciate the Depeche Mode greatest hits. Beyond
Would you
that,
do it on karaoke?
No, but I know what you're referencing. I actually ate at that place. It's in Alexandria. It's the Rockets Bar and Grill in Alexandria fairly recently, but I did not sing Depeche Mode on stage.
Oh, it's a shame.
I missed out. I was actually having lunch with a friend there, and I told him about this being the place where the infamous Spencer Depeche Mode karaoke happened. He was like, "Wait, this is the place?" But Yeah, when it comes to music, so I was really into metal for most of my teenage and young adult years. I've definitely branched out since then. When it comes to genres, I do like quite a bit of metal. I like post rock, post metal. I like ambient stuff. I can appreciate some house and trance here and there.
Do you like a doom metal?
I appreciate doom metal. Sleep, maybe they're a little more stoner rock. Electric Wizard, stuff like that is pretty good, definitely.
What do you think about The Sword?
The Sword is really good. I didn't get into them quite as much as some of the other stuff, but I had a few of their albums years ago, and I really liked them.
Yeah, they're quite good. I'm more into the 70s metal or late 60s, and I don't know, like Sir Lord Baltimore, like the first like 3 or 4 Black Sabbath albums.
Nice.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, that stuff's really good too. Captain Beyond, Captain
that's
Beefheart,
great.
Sweet Smoke. I had some friends when I was towards the end of my time in college who were really active in local bands in San Diego, and they were really into like the psych stuff. So I definitely got exposed to a lot of that. It's good. Do you like Earthless?
Yeah. But nice. I don't know. Are you into black metal?
Yeah, I do like a lot of black metal. I actually played in a black metal band.
That's typical. Here we go.
That's right. I'm a walking stereotype. I'll say this: I played in a black metal band when I was a teenager.
Really?
And there are pictures out there, but my name isn't out there, and no one really knows the name of the band. So, if anyone finds it, I will deny.
Get the band back together. That's great.
Bring the band back.
Yeah, I got back in touch with some of the guys after years and years, and I told them about I was like, yeah, I'm a Trump supporter now. I've, questioned a lot of the, realizations I've come to. And one of them was apparently radical, far left Antifa. And it's funny because at the time when we were all in the band, he was kind of a lowbrow racist. His positions on race were, whites are better than non-whites. I don't like how loud their music is, and, their culture is stupid. And the time I was like, I don't know if I really agree, but every now and then he'd throw something in that was thought provoking, and then apparently now he's a far left radical anti-racist. He told me that when we got back in touch briefly, he told me that he has a black girlfriend and she's really awesome, and like, aren't I so mad about that? And I was like, I don't really care, but so yeah, the band Compot will not be getting back together. The other band that I played in, well, I was only really in 2 bands that went anywhere in terms of like playing shows and stuff. The other one was a post-rock band, and I would be less embarrassed if people found, footage and whatever of that. But most of those guys are fairly liberal, so don't think that one's getting back together either.
Mars Volta's getting back together, man.
I guess anything is possible.
But do you buy into the white nationalist and black metal connection, or do you think that that's smoke?
So I think the obvious point to make here is that there absolutely are many National Socialist black metal bands. In fact, there is a subgenre of the subgenre, NSBM, right? So, I mean, there's definitely that there. I think the important thing to understand about black metal is that it was, at least at the beginning, and perhaps to some extent still is, a revolt or rebellion against the modern world. That doesn't mean that the conclusions reached, if any, were really reached as a result of that rebellion were sound and worthwhile, for example, Satanism. But, you did have these guys, particularly, Varg and the others in the early stuff like Mayhem, who did experience, I think, just on a visceral level, a disgust with the modern world, a sense of alienation that a lot of it had to do with, technology, with immigration, mass, left-wing, stuff that was going on. But And some of that absolutely is sound. But I think that when you have teenagers who are just committed to transgressing and taking that path as far as it goes, well, you saw where that ended with, mayhem. The guy killed himself. Varg killed Euronymous. None of that's good, obviously. But he claims it was in self-defense. I don't know.
I'm inclined to believe him on that.
Yeah, I believe Varg's story, but I don't know about the burning down churches.
Yeah.
I absolutely don't support that, and that would definitely fall into the category of transgressing, taken too far. But I think that I was interested in black metal when I was 15 or 16, and I read some of the early writings that Varg had on his site, and I don't know how much I would agree with that stuff now. Maybe just kind of the general idea that the modern world is not really meeting man's needs. I certainly would agree with that, but I think that did kind of get me to start questioning things going on around me. But with regard to, you have this weird situation where I think you'll have these metal bands that will feature maybe Third Reich imagery in one of their music videos, or they'll have a song about, like, one example would be Marduk, right? They have this song, Panzer Division Marduk, 3 minutes of blast beats and tremolo picking and screaming about destruction. And does that qualify as sincere devotion to National Socialism? I don't think it does. Maybe the guys secretly believe it, but in today's climate, what's happening is that you have Antifa going back through the interview and lyrical histories of these metal bands to find some premise to say, okay, Marduk is a fascist band. Marduk needs to get deplatformed. And you saw that recently with Horna. I've been familiar with Horna and some of the other side projects of these, Finnish black metalers for a while. And I had no idea that they found like one quote the guy said 20 years ago, I think. And they're like, all right, now, that quote is justification for people to no platform, deplatform and so forth. But I think black metal and metal in general is in large part is about being rebellious. Now, again, there's some things that you shouldn't rebel against. There are some values that are held to be sacred and true in society that actually should be considered sacred and true. But I just don't think it's in the spirit. This hall monitor culture that you find on the left. I don't really think it's in the spirit of metal.
There's a very strong, hypothesis that's being made about how, in essence, black metal is, fascist or National Socialist. So it's not even just a case of it's a large group of people, and that some people believe one thing and other people believe another thing. There's, with the black metal critics, there's a sense that they're saying that black metal is inherently National Socialist, and that all black metal will, some eventually become National Socialist if the individuals who are in the movement and in that genre, continue to progress down that road, which I think is like, overstating things. Because I was just posting about this yesterday, is that I have my own kind of theory about this, is that it's a very long genealogy of black metal going back to like Lebensreform movements in the 19th century, which like somehow became the Nazi movement, but then also became 1960s hippies, and then that became like witchcraft stuff in the 70s, and then that became like black metal. That's
interesting.
Yeah, it's all there when you really think about it. If you look at the hippies all descended from the Nature Boys in like the 1950s, who were like people who lived around California and practiced the Lebensreform movement, and Rudolf Steiner and that sort of kind of thing. And they lived in the California wilderness, and that's why hippies had long hair. So when you really think about it, the whole hippie movement was created by, proto-nationalist, early ecology groups from like 19th century Germany that were also the undercurrent of like the Thule Society and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I've definitely been appreciating you tracing back these lineages on Twitter. I found it incredibly interesting. And yeah, I think there's definitely an argument to be made there. The last thing I'll say about metal, or at least, responding to the claim made by the left that black metal in particular is inherently nationalistic or even national socialist, is that I do think that there are elements of metal in general, but in black metal in particular, that are inherently romantic, right? The focus on the dark, the irrational, the unknown, kind of the grandness of just how beautiful and profound nature is. And I think that the connection between romanticism and nationalism has been pretty well established. So I don't know if I wouldn't argue or accept the argument that black metal inherently leads to National Socialism, but I do think that there are some, very subtle and maybe even atavistic elements to black metal in terms of the feelings that it evokes and the aesthetics and so forth that are totally in line with nationalism. But I think that the average person, in fact, I would say that the overwhelming majority of people who listen to, anything from Dark Throne to Burzum to, Cradle of Filth, if you consider that black metal, are not National Socialists, nor will they ever be.
Yeah, it's really, it's not clear where the line is supposed to get drawn, because everything gets corrupted using that kind of argument that, it's inherently racist, inherently fascist.
The well is poisoned.
Yeah, so that anyone who takes one step into it, anyone who reads Jordan Peterson is going to end up turning into a Nazi at the end of the day.
Yeah, they would love to. I mean, yeah, they just want to make it so if it's anyone who's, I think Moldbug, he probably wasn't the first to say it, but Moldbug did make the argument that the left functions like a club. And they will be very clear to let you know who is in the club and who is excluded. And I think what you're describing is a way for them to, basically gatekeep and to say that, okay, not only are these, terrible neo-Nazi whatevers out there not in our club and thus unpersoned and dehumanized, but it's a way for them to keep expanding that circle of dehumanization and unpersoning to encompass everyone who doesn't go along unquestioningly with the left. And it's very sick. I don't know if the people involved are aware of that or would even care, if they came to understand it that way. But one interesting angle to consider there is, the left argues, some of these leftists, as we just said, argue that black metal is inherently nationalistic. Maybe they would apply that to metal overall, right? You have folk metal and various other types that are, perhaps quite right wing. But I mean, there is an argument to be made for, a lot of this black metal. Like if I'm not a Christian, but I see what a Christian is getting at when they say that the left, a lot of what these people promote are, when they say, oh, they're demons or, oh, they're satanic, right? I can definitely appreciate that in an allegorical or a mythopoetic way, right? The things that these people embody and represent, the psychological drives that they that they focus on and romanticize, could be described in such terms. So it's kind of funny where if they're saying, oh well, black metal is truly nationalistic, National Socialist, which National Socialism, I do not promote it, but if you look at what it was ostensibly about, it was ostensibly about the sun. It was about positivity and that which is life affirming. They definitely took things quite a bit out of hand along those lines. But it's like, well, who really represents black metal or the spirit of black metal if you have all of the satanic black metal singing about just darkness and evil, and then you have the left that are promoting things that could rightfully be described as evil. It's kind of interesting. You can see both angles, but to say that this genre of music or this field of artistic endeavor is inherently X is a bit I think it's just, with a few exceptions, is probably bound to have some issues.
And that's the real problem with that we started out with, is that it's this ethics of hermeneutics, is how we're allowed to interpret these things is that why can't we, we were talking about like what is the spirit of black metal? There's no objective answer to that question. So, and
Right.
Trying to condemn people for liking black metal or trying to use association to black metal to condemn people within the black metal genre, I mean, it's a very dishonest thing to do.
Well, that's what they want to do with the arts, is just tear down everything, poison every single well, so that everything is tainted. I think that's when you brought up the arts, it struck me as pretty interesting because that's exactly what it is. This music, and it's not to be corny, but it's art, and artistic endeavors shouldn't be held to, I don't think, a standard of political action or anything like that, unless it's profoundly explicit in that case. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the politicization of art, and I would argue society overall, has only made things worse for everyone involved. I think there is a time and place for art, political art. That's obviously, I think, as long as politics exists, there's going to be political art.
Right.
But at the same time, the idea that it's just it's an incredible disservice to artistic endeavor to force everything to be politicized, right? Or to say that, this is off limits because the themes that it evokes, the feelings that it evokes
Exactly.
are inherently lead to national. It's like, come on, you're cutting off an entire. Imagine if they did that to romanticism in general, right? Oh, well, this leads to nationalism, so we can't have any Caspar David Friedrich paintings, and all of these guys with the Wanderer as their Twitter avatar need to be thrown in gulags, which maybe for the sake of Twitter profile picture diversity might not be the worst thing. I don't support people being thrown in gulags for their Twitter profile pictures.
Why not?
Just for the record, but
That's where you meet different, my friend.
The crimes against content are, people talk about crimes against humanity all the time, but the real pressing moral issues in our society are the crimes against content. It's people putting content out into the public square that just isn't fit for for consumption, and it's that's the real issue. Honestly.
That's the real crime.
Now
against
that's a
humanity.
man after my own heart. That's why me and you are always going to be friends.
That's right.
It's an eternal
But
bond.
I guess we've been talking for a little while now, so I'll let you go. I just want to thank you for coming on and talking to us for as long as you did.
Yeah, thank you, Alex.
Do you want to plug your website, your Twitter account, anything you want, man?
Sure. Yeah. So people who are interested in American identity movement can go to twitter.com/aim_America. There you will find links to our website. You can learn a little bit more about us. Obviously, if you support what we do, a donation would be fantastic. You can find that information on our website. And if you're interested in joining and getting involved either as an activist or someone who, is just going to be hanging out behind the scenes and meeting others who are well-adjusted and of like mind, then you can fill out an application on our website. And my personal Twitter account is @PatrickCaseyUSA. But yeah, thank you, gents, for having me on. This was a good talk.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks, Patrick, and have a great night.
You too.